Hello and welcome back. We are here to do another book that I finished reading. Now, I know what you're saying. How is this possible? You finished reading 2 books in 10 days? This is madness! But no, I did. Because I made time for it, like I said I would. So, the book that I'm doing today is... what I finished today is this book here. It's called In Tongues by Thomas Gratton. And I chose to read this book, actually for a very, very important reason. Is that I went to college with this guy. I went to college with Tom Gratton. We were in the theater program together. We acted together. We know each other well, and it's always nice to see an old friend getting some success. So I thought, what the heck? I know he's been in a lot of important newspapers. I know he's had interviews with really important people. I figure, this channel really ought to just sort of push him right over the top, right? This video right here. So you're welcome, basically. But no, I saw that he'd published this. It came out in May, and I thought, what the heck? It seems neat. So here's the thing. It is literary fiction. And I don't really read a whole lot of literary fiction. If you go through my all of my videos, you will see, other than kind of the English class staples, there's a lot of science fiction, there's a lot of fantasy, there's a smidgen of horror, things like that. So I don't read a lot of lit fic. And literary fiction is generally very realistic, very true to life, right? It's generally not what I read. So honestly, I was a little bit worried that I wouldn't know how to read this kind of book, if that makes any sense. With science fiction, fantasy, horror, genre books, right, there are a lot of tropes, a lot of things that you can kind of expect to happen. And I'm very familiar with those, right? I can kind of see a little bit into the future or of the story, and sometimes the writer can surprise you by subverting those tropes or exploiting them in different ways. I don't really know the tropes of literary fiction as well. I'm reading this and there's no robots, there's no wizards, there's no aliens, spaceships, laser fights, car chases. There are a couple of explosions, but they kind of happen off screen and don't really affect the story all that much. But nevertheless, I was a little concerned, but you know what? You got to try new things, right? You got to expand your scope and try new stuff. So I said, I will give it a shot. All right, so the story. The story is this young man, Gordon. We'll get to that. Gordon from Minnesota. He breaks up with his boyfriend. He steals a bunch of money from him and then gets on a bus to New York City. Because, of course, that's where you're going to go if you're going to restart your life and reinvent yourself. Goes to New York, gets, the classic kind of really awful, crappy apartment and really awful job. But through the intercession of some friends and some good chance meetings, he starts to improve. His life starts to improve. He becomes a dog walker. Which doesn't sound great, but that does lead him to meet this wealthy couple, these 2 men, Philip and Nicola. And he gets in well. He gets along very well with them. They're interested in him for reasons. And he ends up becoming their personal assistant, right? Everything is looking great. He's meeting more people. He's meeting a lot of artists. He becomes a model for this artist named Pavel. And then the paintings that Pavel paints become really, really popular. He ends up going to Europe. He goes to all these fancy places, lives in fancy houses, wears or borrows fancy clothes. And then, of course, there is the reversal, right? Everything falls apart, right? He loses the job, the people that he thinks he can count on, he loses them. He even loses the family that he thought he had kind of regained. We'll get to that in a bit. But he eventually, of course, finds his feet again. He has a bit of a stroke of good luck. And he kind of leads a life that he decides to lead, I should say, instead of kind of falling from one state or situation to another. The whole thing kind of spans from the late 90s to about the present. So it takes a lot of time. And there are some interesting moments where the narrator, Gordon is narrating, of course, where he refers to things that are happening now, like in the present of him telling the story, like about how a character that we were talking about in the story will eventually get married and they will eventually break up, but they'll have kids and things like that. So that's kind of a neat trick, is that you do get a good sense that Gordon is telling us this story at some point here in the early to mid 2020s. I like that. So yeah, the story is a coming of age story. It's a queer coming of age story. Gordon, of course, is a young gay man. And he is kind of trying to learn, like all of us were in our 20s, trying to learn who we are. He's trying to learn what he wants out of life and what kind of holds him back in a lot of ways in terms of how he connects with people and how he deals with challenges and difficulties. And so in that sense, it was interesting to read. It was a little bit, frustrating. You get frustrated to read a story sometimes where you kind of want to reach into the book and slap the main character because they're making dumb choices. But if they always made good choices, we wouldn't have a book now, would we? Because that would be an incredibly boring book. A book where the character always made good, well thought out choices that led to the optimal result. Nobody really wants to read that. We want to read someone who kind of sets their life on fire. That's more fun. So, my general thoughts on it is, well, Gordon, and I have a weird theory. And Tom, you can tell me if I'm wrong. I don't think that's his real name. I don't think it is. Why do I not think it is? Because we kind of learn a bit about his personality at the very beginning of the book. We learn, in terms of his basic personality traits, that he is kind of flippant. He's kind of jokey. He's kind of... he doesn't seem to take things terribly seriously. We see that throughout the book, that he doesn't. And when he finally introduces himself to his friend Janice, and I think she says, "Oh, you're only the second Gordon I've met," there's something about that moment that tells me that he invented the name, or he just came up with the name Gordon in the moment. And since now he's telling the story, he has to kind of stick with it. I might be wrong. I might be reading too much into it. That does happen. But nevertheless, Gordon kind of goes through the world guided by other people, right? He gets this job as a dog walker because his friend Janice knows someone who can get him a job. Philip and Nicola, they offer him a job as their assistant. Pavel asks him to be a model. Eventually, his father, when everything goes wrong, his father allows him a place where he can pull himself together. Gordon doesn't seem to want anything, which is interesting. We don't get really a sense of ambition from him in the story. The only thing he really does want is to be wanted. When he's talking about Philip and Nicola, he says, "I was becoming essential to them. I was being needed was a drug that I couldn't turn down," right? Or he says, another good quote, somebody asks him if he's an aspiring artist because he's doing modeling with Pavel. And Gordon says, "I'm not an aspiring anything. A few people chuckled. I let them think it was a joke." And much further on in the story, he said, "I felt ashamed at the way I let others lead me to things." So that is kind of Gordon's MO. He lets other people lead him to a job or a relationship or a meeting. The only kind of thing that he does really go out of his way to try to get is sex. Which, did I miss something in my 20s? I must have missed something. Maybe it's because I wasn't living in New York. But Gordon, by God, he just walks around. You'll see a guy on the street, and you kind of look at him, and he'll look at the guy, and the guy will look at him, and the guy will go, "Yeah, let's go." What did I miss? Anyway, maybe that is one of those genre conventions that I was not really ready for, is that the main character can go out to the woods or pick up a guy in a club or just pick up a guy walking down the street, and he can go off and have some, a fun little one-moment stand, as it were. Because that felt like a genre thing, and for a moment I was like, man, I really missed something in my 20s. I clearly was doing something wrong. But nevertheless, those are the things that he goes out to get. He goes seeking. But other stuff, big life stuff, it isn't. In fact, his life, in a lot of ways, comes across as kind of transactional in some ways. He has these relationships that benefit him to one degree or another, with home or a status or fancy clothes or a trip to Europe or stuff like that. And when that relationship is no longer providing him with things, it just sort of cuts off, and he acts like he doesn't care. He does care, but he acts like he doesn't care. And even though what he wants is to be wanted by other people, and people do want him, there's some mistake or there's some misunderstanding or something like that. And then he's like, "Well, I'm done. I'll move on to what's next," right? And that keeps going until he's lost everyone. As the book continues, as Nicola and Philip fire him, and Pavel kind of says, "Well, I'm done painting you, so I'm not really interested in you." And even his own father, right? He moves in with his dad, who is this sort of born again, I want to say, not sure which denomination of Christianity. It's never really mentioned. I want to say Pentecostal, because there's a lot of speaking in tongues, which gets to the title, which we'll get to in a second. But even his father, who is desperate throughout the book to reconnect with him, at a certain point near the end just goes, I can't do this anymore. Here's your suitcase, get out. And all of these relationships just sort of fall apart. And honestly, I'm pretty sure that all of the other characters kind of they've got his number, but he thinks he's being mysterious about himself. He thinks he's being kind of a man of mystery, but people kind of know what's up, and they put up with him until they really can't. And there's a really neat line. He says, "I'd woven myself so tightly in my own role as abandoned that I couldn't consider what lay beyond its knitted pattern." There is a lot of nice writing in this book, by the way. We'll talk about that. There's some nice writing there. Why is he like this? I don't know. Could be his parents. His mom is this very cold, sort of undemonstrative woman. His father is sort of a man-child almost, who raises him sort of, and then eventually converts to this very, very sort of cultish Christianity. And he really, like I said, desperately wants to reconnect with his son. But once they do reconnect, they discover there's really nothing there. So it's not really until the end of the book that Gordon gets his life together and he starts making choices. But even those choices are sort of like a chain of events. Like he gets a job as a temp in a hospital, and somebody says, "Hey, we like you. Why don't you stick around?" Offer him a real job. And eventually he signs up for a nursing course and becomes an RN. So he's starting to gain control of his life and begin to settle. We don't really get to see that phase of his life, though. That's just sort of a jump cut to part 4. So yeah, Gordon's an interesting character. And again, he's tough to read sometimes because you do want him to make a choice for himself because of something that he wants, but all he wants is to be wanted. He's put his whole value in other people. So yeah, it is a little bit tough to like Gordon in some ways because he doesn't want to make choices for himself. He wants other people to want him. And so he's putting a lot of his own value on other people, which is unsustainable, frankly. You've got to have an internal source of value in order for these things to work. And I think by the end he's figured that out, or is it still in the process of figuring that out? But I think that's a good reflection of, one of those things you just have to learn as you're going through your young adulthood. You're going through your 20s and 30s, you have to learn. If you cannot give yourself value, then relying on other people to give you value, it's not going to last. It is temporary at best. So overall, I mentioned the writing and that wonderful line about using the knitting metaphor. I liked the writing a lot. It was very pleasant to read. He did a good job. The characters are really kind of solid and relatable. Even kind of minor characters or characters who kind of pop up in and out. Even though Gordon's kind of making a mess of his life, we, the reader, don't see these characters as adversaries or problems because Gordon doesn't really see them as adversaries or problems. And it's a first-person point of view book, right? So Gordon kind of says, well, this relationship didn't work, but he doesn't really seem to resent other people. So what I do kind of get a sense, though, is that Gordon is the problem in these relationships. And even though he doesn't understand it, other people want him to be better. Other people want things from him. And it's a clever bit of writing. I imagine it's a tricky bit of writing to do, to characterize these other characters, these not Gordons, in such a way that we, the reader, understand sort of what their understanding of Gordon is, even though Gordon doesn't understand what their understanding of Gordon is. I think that makes sense. I don't know if that makes sense. I'm a little hungry. We'll find out. But nevertheless, yeah, I think it's nice. It's a pleasure to read. I really liked it. As I mentioned before, there is sex in this. The sex, I think, is, again, not something I usually encounter in a lot of genre fiction. It doesn't pop up, and if it does, it's usually kind of a fade to black sort of thing. Here, it's there. It is not like, graphic and raunchy, but you definitely understand why it happens, and you understand its effect on Gordon. And it's there. It's fine. It reads fine. I don't care. There are really good descriptions of places, especially in situations like when they travel, they go to different cities or they go to Europe. And I think the descriptors are really good because they, Grattan will put in little moments, little sort of details about the surrounding, which doesn't really have any impact on what's going on in the scene, but it does give you a good sense of where they are. So I like that. It was good. A few other things. Let's see. The title. Honestly, the title and the cover. The title still puzzles me. I'm going to admit to that. I don't quite get it. Speaking in tongues is definitely a reference to his father's church, and the process of speaking in tongues is supposed to be like a very personal understanding in the moment when the Holy Spirit comes through you, and people who are speaking in tongues will often kind of seem to babble or make incoherent noise. It's a moment of spiritual ecstasy, right? That's what it's supposed to be. And we kind of get a glimpse that Gordon, when he was with his father, when he was visiting the church, did not understand that. And I'm not sure how it works. Not sure how it fits. Maybe it has to do with Gordon and his need to be understood and other people don't understand him. Maybe it's Gordon doesn't really understand other people very well, but he thinks he does. So yeah, I'm not quite sure. I know that choosing a title is one of the big challenges of writing a book, and sometimes the title comes first, and you write a book around it. Sometimes you have to try out a bunch of titles and see what works. This is obviously the title that Grattan wanted, and that he said, "This is the title of my book." I don't understand, but I think that's probably a me problem. So many problems are me problems. It's not very healthy, I think. Anyway, the cover, the illustration, I think I'm a little bit better with. It's this dog panting. I think it's definitely reference to the dog walking job that definitely got Gordon kind of within this chain of transformation. But I was also thinking that is Gordon, in fact, well, not in fact, but is Gordon, figuratively, a dog? He's being led from place to place by these people who have more power or influence or knowledge. He doesn't really seem to understand the forces that are directing him or what's going on or why, but he enjoys it anyway. And maybe I was thinking, is this book, if we want to kind of boil down to the core of what is this book about, is this book about becoming human in a sense, right? Going from that stage of life where you are led by others to making choices to lead yourself, which is, Gordon at the end making choices to become a nurse and help other people. Maybe, I'll take that shot. So those two things were a little fuzzy. I had to work a bit on the cover. I still don't really get the title. One other thing I like is there's a lot of playing, as I said, with time. There are a few flashbacks where we get to see Gordon's childhood. We get to meet the one person he absolutely could not have sex with, a acquaintance named Brian. The story, as I said, is being told right about now, and there are these sort of references or allusions to things that are happening in Gordon's life at the moment. There was this, because it's in New York, the September 11th attacks do happen in the book. It is referenced, but it doesn't really have a big impact on it. For a moment, I was thinking, oh God, this is going to become a 9/11 book. And it doesn't. It's there. It happens. It affects the characters. They don't pretend it never happened. It affects them, but it's not really what the book is about. So, and there is allusion to COVID as well, I think, at the very, very end. So overall, I enjoyed the book. It is out of my usual field of reading. I had a good time reading it. I think it's well worth reading. He has another book out apparently called The Recent East, so I'll have to put that on my list. But yeah, I thought it was good. So the lessons we can take from this is, number one, always have a source of inspiration and motivation within yourself. Number two, support your friends when they succeed. Tom, you wrote a good book. I think you should be very proud of yourself, and I was glad to have read it. So thank you all. If you have read In Tongues, it's only been out for a little while, but if you've read it and you want to join in the comments, if you know what the title means, put it in the comments. If you haven't read it, please do, and let me know what you think. So thanks very much. When I finish another book, I will tell you, and I'll be back here with another video. In 10 days? We'll see. So thanks for sticking around. I always appreciate it. I will see you next time.